What if the wind said your name and then kept saying it after you stopped breathing? What if the snow learned your footsteps and began to walk them back to you? Some stories should not survive the dark, but up here the dark keeps everything, even the things that were never alive to begin with. Welcome back to my channel, Whispering Abyss. Tonight, I have something truly haunting. 5 Arctic horror stories that feel like they could be true because they start the way real nights do. A job to finish. A light that flickers. A voice you think you know. From countdowns echoing in abandoned research stations to ridges that sing when no wind blows. Every story here is a mystery waiting to unfold. There are choices that cannot be undone, clocks that will not stop, and footsteps that do not match the living. Settle in, pull the blanket tight, and listen for the small sounds. Which story creeped you out the most? Let us know in the comments. Your theories might explain what the cold refuses to tell. Story 1. The whiteout that follow my footsteps. They told me whiteouts come like a curtain. One tug of wind, and every line of the world disappears. That night the world did not just disappear. I looked back. I saw my own footprints forming ahead of me. Crisp oval bites in untouched snow, pacing where I had not yet stepped. I told myself it was glare or a headache behind my eyes, yet the prints waited. They faced me, toes angled my way, as if something had walked from camp to meet me, borrowing my stride and my size. The wind kept its voice low, then let out a long, thin breath that almost sounded like my name. What else could it have been? At all. I am Nolan Keene, meteorological tech for Station Argyle, the smallest dot of lights on a coast that forgets the sun for months at a time. I was late returning from a sensor check because I refused to be the guy who lost an anemometer to an early gust. Reliable is what I clung to out here. People like Rhea and Anders counted on my numbers. They joked that I loved the wind more than sleep. Maybe I did. Maybe I wanted the quiet approval more than I wanted to admit. Tonight would decide whether I deserved any of it, or whether I walked back into camp with nothing but excuses. My father always said competence is a blanket you wrap tight in storms and hope. My compass stuttered when I tapped it. The needle jerked in fits, then quivered toward north, then slid sideways as if a slow hand dragged it. The radio test was clean, a hiss in my own voice, but the air itself felt wrong. Snow should hiss when a gust crosses it. It should bite your cheeks and rattle the hood. Instead, a hush rose like a blanket over the drift. I looked back and watched my boot prints fill almost as fast as I made them, snow grains skittering as if pushed by small breaths. I told the dark to knock it off. It did not answer, not with words. The air smelled faintly of wet metal and old ice, like hidden pipes beneath me. I carried a flare gun with 2 cartridges left after a week of training drills, and a headlamp whose battery indicator sat 1 bar from red. Argyle was a 20-minute walk on a clear night. In a whiteout, it could take forever or never. Rhea had a rule about nights like this. If you feel the storm rising, you do not leave the line of flags. You do not try shortcuts. You do not trust your head. I had followed the flags out. Coming back, I could see only the nearest pole, a black wand poking from snow like a warning finger. I told myself to keep breathing slow, to make the battery last. My watch ticked louder than it should tonight. The sound of my steps changed. At first, it was the familiar crunch, a rhythm I knew better than my pulse. Then another crunch slid into the spaces between, half a beat late, like an echo from a wall that was not there. I stopped and the echo stopped. I took 3 quick steps. The other 3 arrived slower, heel heavy and a little closer than they should. I turned in a slow circle, raising the headlamp, and saw nothing but snow, the kind that swallows light and sends nothing back. My breath clouded the beam. Then the cloud thinned, as if a colder breath leaned through mine. Have you ever heard your own pace answered? At the 3rd flag, the line bent. My map said it would, but the bend was wrong. Instead of curving toward the ridge, the flags pointed me back the way I had come. I checked the compass. The needle spun and clicked, then stuck pointing toward my chest. I knelt and brushed snow from the base of the pole. The tag on the metal read F7. F7 was near camp. I had left from F2. I had walked 20 minutes and arrived at a number that should have been behind me. I traced my own prints and saw them fork in a lazy loop that returned to where I stood, as if the storm had worked a circle around me while I pushed forward. How long had it done that? The figure showed when the white unknotted for a second and my headlamp pulled a shadow out of it. A man's shape, hooded, arms at its sides, standing a dozen paces away where no footprints led. I lifted a hand. The figure lifted a hand a heartbeat later, same height, same glove, same small tear I had taped yesterday. My chest went cold at the seam. The light shuddered and the shape faded, then returned when the beam steadied. I cannot see a face. There was only a dark oval where breath should fog the air. I said hello, and my hello came back too clearly, warm like someone else had tasted it first. Would you call out again? I thumbed the radio. Argyle, Keen, I am at F7, request direction. Static laid over my words like frost. I tried again. Rhea, if you copy, key your mic. The only reply was a soft hiss, then a click like a tongue behind teeth. The map was a square of laminated plastic tied to my jacket by a thin cord. I reached for it to double-check bearings and felt only a frayed end. Somewhere between the flags and the loop, I had torn it off and given it to the dark. I told myself not to think about tides or pressure ridges. I had the line, the flare gun, the headlamp, and a promise not to embarrass myself. That promise felt smaller by the minute. The figure stood again when the white loosened. This time it was closer, almost at arm's length, and I saw the scuff on the left boot that matched mine. The thought that saved me from panic was a simple one. Someone had come out on the safety line to find me, and we had tangled our paths. Maybe it was Anders playing a stupid mirror game to keep me moving. I called his name. Anders, you win, cut it out. Anders, said the figure, a fraction late, a shade warmer, as if learning the name. I took a step forward, and the figure took a step back, placing its boot in a space where no snow had pressed a moment earlier. How could it do that? I try to be clinical. Hypoxia can cause auditory mirroring. Stress can make faces where there are none. I licked my lips and tasted the bitter metal of the wind. I closed my eyes and counted 10, then opened them and clicked my headlamp to half power to save the battery. The figure faded to a smear, then to a darker knot in the white. I told myself it was a frost shadow and that I would walk right through it to the next flag. I spoke my plan out loud as if that would make it true. My voice came back, clearer than before, with a hitch I recognized as my own laugh. Why would a shadow find my laugh? I pulled the flare gun because I needed a line in the sky, a color that said up and out. I did not intend to aim it at anything living. I raised it high and squeezed. The cartridge spat light and loud heat that painted the storm red. For one hard second, I saw the figure with clarity. It wore my parka and my hood, my patched sleeve and my torn glove. It had my posture, shoulders slightly forward against the cold. It had no face at all. There was only a pale oval like packed snow where features should be, and out of that oval came a breath that shook the flare's smoke. What was I supposed to tell myself then? The flare hissed into the low sky and died. Darkness folded back over us like a lid. I stepped right, meaning to slide around the thing and find the next pole. It stepped left, exact but late, as if it were learning my path by copying the last line I drew. I stamped the snow to make a new trail, and it did the same, and when I looked down I saw that my fresh print was already softening while its fresh print stayed sharp. It was not chasing me. It was riding me. Each step I took seemed to erase a little of what I had been, as if the snow accepted its mark as the more accurate account. I ran, and the echo multiplied. Instead of one late crunch, I heard 3, then 5, each a fraction behind the last. The storm bent sound into a tight tunnel. It felt like sprinting through a throat. My headlamp showed a tumble of flakes and a hint of vertical, maybe the wall of a drift. I meant to scramble up it and drop to the far side, but the snow there had been pressed by many boots, all mine, the same size, the same angle, a ladder of me. I climbed fast and reached for the top, and the drift slumped under my weight. I slipped backward, arms pinwheeling, and something steadied me with a gloved hand exactly like my own. Would you let go or hold on? I yanked free and tumbled to my knees. The figure crouched as if to mirror the fall, but when I froze, it continued kneeling, then leaned forward and pressed its faceless oval toward mine. The breath that hit me was colder than the air, a cellar draft from under the sea ice. My headlamp flickered when it touched my jacket, and I felt a lace of chill crawl across my chest like frost flowers. I backed away and felt my own lungs fail to fog the air. I was breathing as hard as I could, but the visible proof of it belonged to the thing in front of me. It exhaled a fog that matched my panic and made it look like it owned me. I tried the radio again. Useless. I tried the compass and found the needle pinned to the figure, twitching like a moth against glass. I thought of the flags and chose a direction at random because I could not bear the loop anymore. I ran into flat white, counting steps until my throat hurt. The copies kept pace, a braid of crunches. When I risked a look back, I saw no one, only the chasing prints arriving half a breath. My foot slid into a crack, and air moved under me. Pressure ridge, the kind that forms roofs over black water. I froze, every nerve insisting that stillness was a safe choice left. The figure stopped too, patient, waiting to see what I would trade for my next step. I understood then that standing still only gave it time to learn the rest of me. The needle was its tether. The silence was its weather. If I waited for rescue, I would be replaced by the thing that wore my clothes better than I did. The only edge I had was time. The battery blinked. I watched the crack run under the drift like a dark smile. The water beneath would be black and breathless. I had one flare left. I could save it for a signal or spend it to make the storm remember how to make noise. I chose wrong or right in the same motion and eased my weight onto the flexing crust. The crust bowed. A thin sheen of ice creaked below me. I lifted the flare gun, sighted the seam, and fired in the crack. Light speared the dark water and threw up a hiss that sounded alive. The roar that followed was not the wind. It was the ocean pulling breath through teeth. Noise rolled over me, and for the first time in an hour the world had a voice again. The silence fled like a spooked animal. The figure flickered and thinned. Its prints sharpened, then slurred. My headlamp steadied as if a hand had let go. My immediate gain was movement. The delayed cost would come later, but I could not yet name it. With the crack hissing and steaming, I moved along its edge toward where I hoped the causeway ran. The compass needle loosened and pointed, not true north, but away from the figure, which was good enough. I listened for something human. The storm offered a faint hum, the kind a generator makes when it is tired of being useful. I followed the hum and counted steps. 20 to a pause, 20 more. My breath refused to show, but the figure's fog had gone thin, as if the cold inside it were leaking away. Well, the hum died for a heartbeat. I stood in a blank place with no sound at all. The figure waited there, patient, as if it had been listening too. I understood the second twist in a simple flash. It was not a person pretending to be me. It was the storm's way of keeping the world tidy, a memory that insisted every path be a closed loop and every step be accounted for. It wrote me so that I could be filed away in the snow, neat and untroubling. The silence was its ledger. My voice and my breath were entries it was erasing. If I kept following the habits that made me reliable, it would finish the job. I needed to do the ugliest thing Rhea ever warned against. I needed to leave the line and walk where no flag could forgive me. Would you break the one rule that kept you alive? I turned my back on the poles and the hum and strode into the little white hills that never end. I counted 40 steps and did not look back. Every survival class says the same. If you become disoriented, hug the known until the known hugs you. I did the opposite. I stopped counting at 40 because counting had become its trick. I shut off the headlamp for 3 breaths to starve the thing of my light. When I clicked it on again, the beam was weak, a pencil line dying in milk. I whispered to you without knowing it, a small please, and walked toward where the dark felt thinner. Not safer, only thinner. What meet me there? I stepped into snow that rose to my thighs and clawed forward until the texture changed underfoot. Packed, tamped, swept by boots. Not mine. I tasted diesel and antifreeze, a sweet chemical that meant machines and people. The storm pulled one stitch loose, and through that slit, I saw a smear of yellow, the wash of a sodium lamp. I had skirted the flag path and met the boardwalk where cargo sleds chewed a groove. Behind me, the crunches piled up, then hesitated. The figure stood at the edge of the unseen circle it had been making, unable or unwilling to step onto the different noise. It breathed once, a long, empty sigh, and the silence gathered itself like a scarf around my shoulders, then slipped away. I do not remember the last 20 steps. I know there was a door, and heat that hurt, and Ria's voice stacked with curses that sounded like prayers. They said I was on the boardwalk when the light finally cut through. Kneeling, hands open like I was showing them, I had nothing left to hold. I slept and dreamt I was writing in my field book, the pencil jabbing the page every time the station shook. When I woke, the book lay open on my chest. The last line was half finished. I hear my steps still, it read in my own hand, and then a blotted curve that could have become any letter you like. In the morning, Anders called me out to see something I would not enjoy. 2 trails led away from the boardwalk. One was the messy stagger of a man who almost did not make it. The other was a neat line, straight as if snapped with chalk, each print sharp and already resisting the sun. It led toward the causeway and then out across the bay where the ice moves like an animal. No one wanted to follow it. The radio log from the night had one odd click at the minute I fired the flare. A tiny voice shaped like mine said, "Ria, almost right." Who answered that voice, if anyone did? For weeks after, the air around the station felt reliable again. The wind learned its song and kept to it. Then a night came when it held its breath for no reason, and my skin remembered the hush. I lay awake and listened to the hallway outside my bunk. The station pops and ticks when it settles. This was a different sound, a measured crunch, then a second crunch just late, traveling past my door toward the gear room. I went to the mirror and blew a breath at it and watched the glass glaze over. A second fog bloomed beside mine and faded first. Maybe that is normal. Maybe you have seen it too. What did you tell yourself? When the sun thought about returning, a kind of smudge behind the clouds, I walked alone to the edge of the causeway. The crack I had opened was sealed with a skin of new ice. Under it, something had caught a bubble of air the shape of an oval face. When my shadow crossed the spot, the air jittered and slid deeper, as if trying to hide. I stood there a long time, counting without meaning to, until I made myself stop. The wind picked up and said nothing. The snow at my feet softened and then held. Somewhere out on the bay, a clean line of prints walked away from everything we know. Story 2. Station Argyle, and the midnight countdown. The wall clock in the control room flipped to midnight at 11:58. A neat little magic trick that made the fluorescent light feel colder and the floor feel higher. No one touched it. Power did not fail. The numbers just blinked, then held, as if the night had rebooted and picked a different starting point. Then a single soft beep, not the tone of our alarms, not the chirp of any watch we owned, rose from the intercom grid and faded like a sigh in a pipe. If you have ever heard a sound that does not belong to your equipment, you know how it sits in your ribs. I am Lena, communications at Station Argyle, which means I babysit radios, clocks, and the space between voices. We rotate overnights because someone has to log skeds in case a helicopter pretends it is brave. My stakes were simple. Keep the logs perfect because the last comms tech turned sloppy and walked off the job after an audit. I promised the team I would not be that story. Ria says I am married to the red binder, and maybe she is right. If I keep the station speaking, the station keeps us a little less alone, which feels like a bargain worth honoring, until it does not. At 11:58, the clock blinked to zeros and held. I thought, harmless glitch. At 11:59, the seconds appeared, then stuttered, then vanished again. The intercom breathed a thin clicking, faint as a nail tapping in a far duct, steady enough to be a metronome. There's a door in Argyle we do not use. A welded bunker door down the service hall, wrapped with hazard tape stained by old hands. It keeps something that was decommissioned, the way you decommission a toothache by refusing to think about it. I checked my notes, ready to write this off, and a page in last week's log was missing, torn clean along the holes. The digital clock hit 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 30 seconds, and every red light in the control room quivered. Not full alarm, just a shiver through the wiring. The air left the vents colder than the room, metallic and dry, the taste of new coins. My headset picked up a layer of hiss I did not like. I tapped the mic and asked the empty night if Central had us on a drill, then smiled because I did not believe it. A second beep climbed out of the speakers, then a third. The pattern formed slowly, like the shape of a sentence in a language you almost remember. What would you do? Call it noise or call it a warning? At 12 o'clock, the first number said 60, clear and clean, neutral voice, female, my age, like a counting exercise for childhood. No one else reacted. I keyed the overnight dorm and whispered for Anders. He grunted, rolled over, and said I was dreaming before I finished. I opened the hallway door and listened. The count was everywhere and nowhere. I could hear it in the air, but not through the bones of the building. At 57, I checked the external feed. Silent. At 53, I carried the portable into the mess and stood by the freezer. The freezer hummed like it always does. My throat knew the count anyway. I wrote everything down because writing makes things real. Midnight, reset, beat pattern. Count from 60. Possible test. I flipped back to find the last time I noted an oddity and found the gap again. A week of neat pages, then one missing sheet. I knew the missing sheet by the faint graphite shadow it left on the paper below, brushed traces from the pencil that had pressed too firm. Someone wrote hard that night. Someone tore it out later. My palm picked up a smear that tasted like dust and old rubber. I thought of Cade, the previous comms, and pictured him folding a page to put in a pocket he would not empty. 39. The red light over the hatch flickered twice, not rhythm, more like irritation in a tired eye. The intercom hiss turned into a tick, the kind an old relay makes when it wants to be admired. I pulled the fault panel, expecting a blown resistor. Everything looked stubbornly normal. The cold from the vents settled around my neck like a scarf. The ticking found the center of the room. If I stood under the grid, it got louder. If I stepped away, it followed. I checked the generator load, then checked it again, pretending not to count with the voice. Have you ever tried not to count when counting is all the air? 26. I called Central on the long shot channel. Nothing but the quiet that eats words. I opened the red binder to the section on drills. The margins held a quick scratch in unfamiliar block letters. Ignore the clock. That is not policy language. That is the language of someone who knows time can be bait. I do not believe in station folklore, but I do believe in caution. I picked up the master key ring, the one with the brass tag that says you will regret this if you use it, and I walked this service hall to the sealed door because ignoring a thing is still a kind of attention. The hazard tape looked new over old. 18. I pressed my ear to the seam. The count sounded closer, as if the numbers stood on the other side of the steel, face against it, willing themselves through. The cold exhale from the door's edge made my eyelids ping with frost. The light above me, that tired red eyelid, brightened to a steady gaze. My radio lost the habit of speech and settled for static. I ran back to control, grabbed bolt cutters, then froze because rules live in my hands even when my head wants to break them. I called the dorm again, louder. Rhea answered with a groan that promised violence if I kept this up. I believe her and hung up. 12. I pulled a manual from under the console and found the page on alarm test procedure. It referenced a subsystem that did not exist on our current schematic. A name I had never seen swam up, Facility Echo. Decom 08. The words felt like something you get told once and then learn to forget. I wanted to believe this was a remote test, a misaddressed packet, anything tidy. The red light did not blink. It watched. 10-9-8. My throat moved without sound. I do not know if I was counting or bracing. The control room air tasted like the inside of a battery. The intercom clicked its little teeth. 7. I made a choice. If it is a drill and I fail to respond, I cost us a citation. If it is not a drill and I open that door, I cost us something else. I took the cutters, picked the tape from the metal with a fingernail, and cut once. The hazard strip fell in a tired ribbon. 6. The master key slid into a lock that should have been welded. 5. I turned. The bolt seated home with a mechanical swallow. 4. The door pushed back like it remembered how to open and was grateful. 3. The red light steadied as if pleased. 2. I pulled, and the breath from inside touched my lips like a word I did not want to learn. 1. The count did not say 0. The intercom clicked. The clock on the wall blinked. The control room screens went black for a breath, then returned. The count started again at 60, cool as a hand on a fevered forehead. I stood with the door open to a black square that ate the world around its mouth. The cold was surgical, not wild. Metallic air touched my teeth and made them ache. I reached for the light and found an old Bakelite switch that groaned when I twisted it. Banks of equipment glowed to life like a small city waking. The chamber was narrow, low ceiling, racks on both sides with reels and patch cords, and a digital timer that knew one joke. I stepped across and listened. The countdown came from everywhere at once. Tiny speakers strapped into the walls like barnacles. I put my hand on a reel and felt its faint whir, as if a moth beat its wings inside the canister. The patch bay was labeled with elegant tape from another decade. Intercom feed, dorm feed. I'll call. The voice counted 58, 57, then held its breath. I whispered hello because talking to machines is part of the job. The voice answered with my hello, not replayed, not sampled. It wore the weight of my throat and the small tired lift at the end, the way I say the word when I'm the last person awake. I spoke again, a clean test phrase. This is Argyle, station test, confirm. The phrase returned out of the speakers at the same moment. My tongue still shaped it, a half-second late. A bad radio link impersonating my mouth. The room is recording me, I thought, and the room is speaking me. The timer read 0:45 and dropped. I unplugged the intercom feed. The voice fell to a whisper and then came back, picking a different path. The red light over the door did not blink. It stared and warmed the back of my neck. Cold air made the inside of my nose ache. I do not know if I said my own name or heard it. On the far wall, a clipboard hung by a chain. The top page was the missing log, my station log, the graphite shadow that had stained the binder beneath. The handwriting was mine, letters even and small. The date was last week. The note said, "We heard a countdown." The page ended midline, torn. Under it, a second sheet bore 2 words in the same hand. Next time, I did not write that. The pencil beside it was ground to a blunt nail. I looked at my fingers and found a thin smear of graphite from the earlier search. The count said 33, and I finally understood that the drill had the voice it wanted. I tried to starve it. I clamped my mouth shut and breathed through my nose. The speakers thinned, searching for a signal. I pulled patch cords one by one. Mess, dorm, tower med. Each time the voice dipped, then recovered along a path I had not expected. It had eaten years of comms checks and routine tests. It had memorized the shape of us, saying we were fine. The red light grew warmer, almost soft. The clock in the control room, visible through the doorway, flipped to midnight and held like a hell breath. I wanted to wake everyone and make them listen. I kept my hand on the last live cord like it was a leash. 21. The train of numbers took on the rhythm of a heart monitor. I felt the temptation to finish it. Numbers invite completion. Finish the count. Throw a switch. Let the system congratulate itself and die. The manual note, "Ignore the clock," had the stubborn voice of hard-won advice. The hazard tape, doubled up, said someone tried to make this final. I looked up. Above the racks, a painted nameplate read Facility Echo, a joke with teeth. The room wanted me to help it complete a loop that we had inherited. I thought of Cade, of missing pages, of audit marks that hide what they cannot fix. I did the worst thing a comms officer can do. I killed a room. I pulled the master breaker. The lights went dark. The red bulb above the door kept its stare because it was fed by a stubborn auxiliary line. The count fell to a murmur I could feel, not hear, a vibration in the racks like something alive but sleeping. The control room beyond me flickered, monitors hiccuping, gauges dropping and rising. The temperature slid. The metallic stink grew full in my mouth until it tasted like I had chewed a battery. 17. You think the problem is solved when the noise stops. You forget that silence is a kind of pressure. I waited, not breathing words, watching the timer that should have died continue from memory. 14. I saw the emergency stop button, big, red, round, the cartoon answer in every film. I pushed it because sometimes the most obvious move is the one you walk around for too long. The button did not click. It gave under my palm like firm fruit and then resisted. The count did not care. 13. The clipboard next to the missing page lifted in the draft from the vents and fell, paper face first, the chain rattling in small complaint. Under it, a message in my handwriting I had not yet read. When the clock resets, do not finish the count. I had counted along in my head without meaning to. Habits kill you kindly. 9. I brought my palm down on the spinning reel and stopped it with friction and pain. The plastic burned a small circle into my skin and made my hands stink like scorched oil. The speakers gasped, numbers stuttering, then settling into a chant that was not counting at all, just the shape of my breathing played back to me from a half second in the future. I unplugged the last cord, felt the wordless vibration settle into the racks like a sulk. 7. I spoke, honest and small. No. The room tried to turn that into a number and failed. 6. I felt it hunting for completion and finding only me. 5. I looked up at the control room, clock one last time. Midnight, then 0:01, then a normal second, clean and silver. 4. The red light softened and drooped as if tired. 3. I held my burned hand on the reel and felt the heat leave both of us. 2. The metallic cold from the vents thinned, replaced by the ordinary stink of our station, coffee grounds, boots, tired lungs. 1. The next number did not come. The timer screen, which should have been dead, showed a blank that looked like a held breath, then winked out like an eye deciding to sleep. I stayed until the sweat cooled and the shiver began. The silence had weight, but it was the usual weight, the good kind that lets you hear your own heart. I closed the breaker, and the racks came back with a sigh that sounded like disappointment. I reversed the chords until the patch bay matched the diagram again. I did not push the red button a second time. I turned the Bakelite knob, killed the chamber lights, and pulled the bunker door until the seal kissed metal. The hazard tape I had cut lay on the floor like a snake that had given up. I picked it up and stuck it back crooked, which felt like honesty, and locked the door. The control room smelled like a tired office. The clock read 0:07 and climbed, normal as any night. I made a log entry I could stand behind. Midnight reset, countdown initiated, probable internal loop, action taken to depower and repatch, monitoring. My hand shook in small, even waves, like a seismograph recording a conversation I did not want to hear again. I did not write the line I read on the clipboard. When the clock resets, do not finish the count. Advice dies when you need it, then returns as if new. I closed the binder and laid my burned palm on the cool metal edge until my skin stopped feeling like a lit match. I slept 2 hours in the chair and dreamed of elevators that never arrive. Rhea woke me with a hand on my shoulder and a string of questions I could not answer fast enough. The red light over the hall was off and winked at no one. We walked to the door together. She touched the tape and made a face. I told her the condensed version. She told me to write the long one. I agreed. We stood there 5 quiet seconds, both of us listening for a voice that would ruin our morning. All we heard was the ductwork trying to be good. The metallic taste in the air took its time leaving. At breakfast, Anders told me I had been talking in my sleep, slow and even like a metronome. He thought it was cute until he saw my face. I checked the log to show him what I had written. A new entry waited where it should not. Timestamp midnight, handwriting mine, neat and small. Next time it finishes. I did not write that line. The pencil pressure was heavy, the way I write when a room is cold. I turned the page and found the missing sheet back where it belonged, untorn, filled with entries that described a night that had not needed me at all. Cade's name appeared once, then blurred where a hand had wiped it. We shut the bunker on paper like you shut your eyes. We taped it with fresh tape and pretended the old glue had not learned the shape of the door. We turned up the heat and joked about batteries and ghosts, because jokes are the way you set a place back down gently. I cleaned my palm and told myself I had overreacted and saved us from nothing more than an old training loop. I left the red binder on the console and went to check the tower for frost. On the way back, I heard a single soft beep slip out of the intercom, polite and patient, like a polite knock from down the hall. That night, the wall clock behaved until 11:58, then twitched, then held. I took the headset off and put on the table because I did not want anything touching my voice. The control room felt colder than the rest of the station, a little metallic tongue on the back of my teeth. I thought about recording the count on the portable, then pictured it using my recording to live longer. I thought about waking everyone and pictured the numbers learning their breathing too. I sat with my hands under my thighs and watched the seconds. They walked forward like good soldiers. At 12:03, the air changed and the red light stayed asleep. I let myself breathe like a person again. 2 days later, a helicopter flew a circle, then thought better of it. The pilot called in on a channel we use for amateurs and asked if we were doing a drill because our all-call tone sounded off. I told him we were fine. He said he could hear a faint ticking when we keyed. I said the wind plays tricks out here, and he laughed the way people do when they want to agree fast. I logged the call and kept the note small because putting fear in the binder is giving it rank. At midnight, the clock kept its numbers. The intercom breathed nothing I could hear. The vents tasted like ordinary air. Sometimes I stand in the hall at the edge of the bunker door and listen. I tell myself I am just making sure the tape is still there, that the lock is still stubborn. On very quiet nights, the duct from the chamber gives off a cool thread of air, the kind that feels like the first second when you open a freezer. I watch the red light. It watches back without waking. If I stay too long, I feel the urge to count my heartbeats, and then I remember the note in my hand that I did not write. When the clock resets, do not finish the count. I swallow the numbers like pills and walk away. I will say this to you because you stayed with me. If you ever hear a countdown that only you can hear, do not correct it. Do not help it. Clocks love neat endings, and machines love complete loops. People survive on broken rhythms. I still check the logs every hour because that is what duty is, a habit you keep even after a room tries to eat your voice. On my desk sits a watch no one claims, cracked face, read secondhand. Once a week it beeps at midnight and then dies for 6 days. When it does, the room tastes like metal and the mirror fogs just enough to draw a zero. Story 3. The singing ridge on the frozen bay, the ice sang that night like a voice under glass, low and patient, as if someone were breathing into the bay from beneath my boots. At first, it was a hum you could pretend belonged to the wind, a long vowel pressed through a throat too wide for words. Then the tone gathered, found itself, and held a note that made my molars buzz. I stood there with the recorder in my glove and watched my breath curl away. The ridge across the frozen water, a pale rise like a sleeping animal, seemed to lean closer with the sound. How you tell a place to stop speaking to you? My name is Tomas. I study birds who treat the Arctic like a secret they trust only once a year. I followed them here to record calls that could change a life on paper. Grants like mine survive on songs. The team joked that I loved the microphone more than sleep. Maybe I did. I had a reason to stay when I should have packed the tent and gone home. One clean capture of a rare flyway chorus would mean a decade of work paid off. The locals told me the ridge sings when it wants a listener. They told me not to be polite. I told them science does not believe in offended hills. The first time I heard it, I was cataloging gulls at dusk. The hum traveled across the flat ice like a tuning fork set on a table. It felt mechanical at that distance, as if a ship far out were idle and purring. Then it climbed into a harmonic that made the hairs on my wrist lift. I looked down and saw frost crawling across my glove, a lace rising quick when the tone rose, then thinning when it fell. At the edge of the camp, someone had planted a bit of driftwood with a pocket knife message. Do not answer the song, it said, the letters picked long ago. I smiled because warnings look like invitations in a notebook. I carry a little field recorder because birds do not wait for your big gear. It has a sensitive diaphragm that eats wind for breakfast if you face it wrong. I held it low to block the chill and clicked record. The display showed a signal before my ears did, a slow wave like a pulse under sleep. I told myself it was distant ice shifting as the tide breathed. Then the ridge sang again, stronger, and all at once my little device sprang a second trace, faint but real, as if something behind me had hummed in reply. I turned to white and sky and the thin pole with that old warning. Have you ever felt a note move behind your spine? The team had tucked in early. The radio carried nothing but joking check-ins and 10:30 goodnights. When the hum matured into a proper song line, my radio fattened with static that moved like water. I tapped the set and got a chorus of clicks that had rhythm, almost like syllables holding their breath. I tried to send a simple log to camp. The transmit light glowed and stayed that way like a stuck stare. Even the battery icon looked nervous. I told myself the ridge was geology, a frozen choir built by tide pressure, beautiful and harmless. I told myself not to listen for a shape in the sound. The gloves stiffened around the recorder when the tone peaked. I waited for the wind to show because wind forgives a lot of strange music. The air was calm as a hell glass. The stars had the sharp edges you only see in hungry cold. The ridge across the bay wore a pale shadow like a blanket folded, just so. The hum grew a hair of resonance that did not fit the ice. It had a throat, or seemed to. I pivoted the recorder, sweeping from left to right, and the meters rose more when I pointed at the driftwood warning than when I aimed at the ridge. That was not possible. I backed up and my boot crunched along a line of tiny fissures that had not been there an hour ago. They trembled under my weight like strings. I tracked the fissures with my headlamp and saw them trace toward the ridge in a web with a center I could not see. Every time the hum swelled, the fissures shivered in time, thin dark mouths trying to speak. I told myself not to step on the thin places, which made every step feel like a choice I could not undo. The gloves iced again, stiffer at the fingertips, as if the air around my hands had been separated from the rest and put into a freezer. The recorder clicked gently the way it does when the automatic gain tries to guess the size of a room. The room felt enormous and very small. It was after midnight when I made the mistake of curiosity. I walked farther out, following the clean patch of ice where the snow had blown clear. The ridge's songs seemed to arrive at the same volume, no matter the distance, a trick I did not like. My breath drifted away, then fell straight down and vanished into a seam that ran for 20 meters like a thin smile. I knelt and held the microphone near the seam. The hum filled the recorder the way a voice fills a cup. The headlamp lit frost crystals growing and shrinking in rhythm, little stars that lived for a beat. Somewhere in the song, very low, something said my name. If you have ever heard your name said in an empty place, you know how your chest understands first. I waited for the rational answer. Maybe camp had keyed up. Maybe Anders was bored and felt like scaring the bird guy. I keyed the radio and called. The ridge answered with my name again, patient, polite, just slightly wrong as if someone had learned it from tape. I held the recorder up and spoke into it. My name, my timestamp, my location. The second channel preferred the hum and kept eating it, but a new trace braided along it. Not quite my voice, not quite anyone I would trust. I should have gone back then. Pressure ridges can rise in a breath. The bay froze in sheets, and where they meet the ocean keeps a memory of waves. Something far away shrugged, and the ice under my knees lifted a hair and settled. That would have been enough to send me home on any sane night. The song found a second line, a harmony a little above the first. The fissures around my boots quivered and widened a fraction, too small to break, big enough to suggest a mouth learning a vowel. I whispered to you without knowing it. I said, I know how this sounds. The recorder spared me no kindness and caught the tremor in my voice. The hum rolled that tremor back at me, gentler, like a return gift. I tried to outpace the music. I walked the long way around toward a cluster of pressure hummocks that would give me cover if the wind decided to wake. Each step pressed a new circle of quiet around me. The radio did not carry beyond the radius of that hush. When I reached the first hummock, the song dimmed just enough for me to hear my coat. I slid behind it and listened. The ridge held its note. Behind me, the driftwood warning ticked in the headlamp beam, a little pendulum in the breeze that had not existed a moment before. I told myself someone carved that once because they were weird. Minutes stretched like a thin filament. Every 5 heartbeats, the song pinched tight, a little rest, then continued like a throat clearing itself. My recorder learned the cadence and began to ride the gain at the rest, jumping the level in the quiet. The machine wanted to be useful. In the tiny half seconds when the song paused, the recorder captured a breath that was not mine, a quick cold inhalation like a child learning to say a word. When the tone returned, that breath had become a syllable I recognized almost too late. It was the first half of my last name, the part people get lazy with. The ridge was practicing. I tried a test. I placed the recorder on the ice, mic facing down, and stepped back 10 paces. The hum did not change. The little screen glowed a steady green. I spoke aloud, not into the recorder, and said a short sentence you might say to a bird you hope will not fly. Easy, easy, stay. The song dipped, paused, and repeated my easy, thin, and eager. Then it tried to hold the S and stay, and turned it into a hiss that traveled under my boots. I felt that hiss in my kneecaps. I did not scare easily when a thing is only sound. This was not only sound anymore. At the camp I picture was a kettle and soft curses about cold fingers. Between me and that picture, the bay lay flat, white, and in the lamp a little too bright. I checked my route and saw a slow rise running perpendicular to the way I came, a fresh pressure ridge taller than it had been an hour ago. It had learned to stand while I listened. As I angled around it, the song moved to a minor key that put a lump in my throat. I know music enough to know when it wants to take something. The fissures answered by opening and closing with that change, tiny mouths practicing a new shape. I kept going. The wind did not rise. The cold did. It lifted in pockets when the hum swelled, the measurable air temperature dropping around my hands and face while the rest stayed stable. It is a strange thing to watch your own exhale hang in a shape, freeze to powder, and fall in pieces when note arrives. It felt like standing in front of a speaker that breathed ice instead of pressure. The radio threw its hands in the air and gave me a wall of quiet. The recorder did not care about comfort. It loved the song like a tool loves a job. I thought about geology to make it clean. Flexure, thermal contraction, pressure from tides under shifting plates. I pictured a simple chamber under the ridge where trapped air pushed through thin cracks and made a note. I held that picture like a hot stone in winter. Then I turned to show you the cliff that would reflect a word into my ear, and I found only flat emptiness and starlight. There was nothing to bounce my name at me, nothing to teach a vowel to obey. The warning on the driftwood, "Do not answer the song," looked less like superstition and more like a hard lesson kept for the next person. Here is where I made the choice that tastes like metal when I remember it. I have been careful for hours, careful with my weight, careful with my thoughts, careful with my mouth. The ridge sang my name again, hungry for the way I would say it, now tugging at the soft consonants like a child learning to whistle. I whispered a reply. I said yes, and I said the ridge has a voice, which is how you make an enemy into a person. The hum paused in that tiny rest and returned with my yes braided inside it. Just a fraction wrong, softer, warmed by a mouth that was learning how tongue. The ice answered in more than sound. The fissures at my feet widened enough to make little clicks like cracking knuckles in time with the next 3 beats. The pressure ridge in front of me sighed and slumped, then rose again as if breathing. A darkness gathered at its core, not a shadow, a density, the suggestion of depth where only snow should live. The recorder loved it. The trace fattened into a beautiful wave that any audio engineer would weep for. I stepped back and the shape edged forward under skin I could not see, as if something long and slim were rolling toward the surface to listen better. I said my full name and then stopped because I felt the mistake enter the world. The song replayed the first half almost perfectly and then lay its own attempt at the rest over mine, like 2 singers trying to meet. My glove hardened again, and the skin beneath my fingers stung as if I had just touched dry ice. The pressure ridge broke open in two thin seams and closed, as if it had blinked. The darkness at its heart moved closer, and when the note rose a little, I felt my kneecaps jump with it. The recorder vibrated in my palm like a living thing. This is when any smart person would run. I did run, but the bay had learned my route. The new pressure ridges were unkind. They rose in gentle rolls that looked harmless until you tried to cross them. Then they forced you to choose between ankle-deep seams or long detours. The song kept me inside a circle the size of a small town square. I could see the camp lights, tiny and steady like stars you own, but the ice between us felt like a soft lung that would only let me in if I sang right. I called on the radio until my throat hurt and got the same waterfall noise over and over, which the hum promptly learned and used as a harmony. When the battery on the recorder dipped into the red, I thought I had an exit. Machines stop, songs tire. When the tone lowered to that patient vowel again, my recorder beeped a warning that the mic picked up and folded into the mix. The ridge liked that beep. It replayed it with a sweetness that turned my stomach. The fishers answered in neat little pops that matched the beeps exactly. I pressed stop to save what I had, and the hum rose, offended, the way a singer does when the sound guy cuts the monitor mid-phrase. I hit record by reflex, because I'm a coward for data. The tone softened, pleased. The shape in the ridge decided to stand. The white surface did not break. It convexed with a roundness like a shoulder beneath a sheet. The headlamp slid light over a curve that should have belonged to snow and did not. I spoke by accident, a word anyone would say. Please. The ridge learned it like it had been waiting for that word all along. Please came back twice. The second version carried a pitch that was not mine, higher, a question asked by someone who did not know what they were asking. My hand shook and the recorder shook with it. The battery icon blinked as if a little heart were learning how to beat. I did not want to make the next sound. Silence would have been a choice. Do not answer the song, the old knife letters said. I failed that sentence a second time. I answered anyway. I said I am here. The ridge took that and cut it in half. I am returned as a statement. Here, arrived later, heavier like a footstep. The fissures opened again, and I saw black water a finger width below the ice, moving like a slow breath. The edges of that water wore lace that grew and shrank with the note. The cold rose around me and filled the space inside my hood, so intimate I could smell the sweetness of my own breath turning to frost. The twist took me a beat to grasp. The song began to use lines of my voice that I had not spoken just then. It used a laugh from earlier in the season, the small snort when a glaucous gull dropped a fish on my boot. It stitched that laugh to my name and made a sentence I did not remember saying. The recorder had trained it. Every unguarded utterance had been a seed. The ridge had my library. It was reading me to myself with new grammar. So when it said come closer, it was not a hallucination. It had borrowed comes I used on birds and sewed them carefully to closer from another night. I stepped back and the song held position. The darkness under the ridge rose to a careful hunch, like a listener leaning in. The fissures ticked and opened, then closed in a rhythm that matched my heart. The glove on my throat stiffened and I felt frost lace my scarf without touching it. I aimed the headlamp low to break the intimacy and saw a trail of driftwood pieces caught at the edge of the ridge, their barkless skin raw pale in the light. On the closest one, half buried, a fresh scratch caught the beam. It was not there when we pitched camp. You answered, it said, the letters wet and dark like a wound. I chose then. I would not finish the song. I would not find out what the next note wanted from lungs. I turned away from the ridge, from the beautiful harm of it, and I walked toward camp without pausing on the S and stay, without offering any vowel the ridge could taste. Every time the tone pressed against my back, I bit my teeth together and counted heartbeats that did not land on the same number twice. The radio was dead weight. The recorder jittered like an animal that wanted to run back to its mother. The fissures crackled, and then finally, blessedly, began to lose the habit of opening at my feet. I reached the line of snow stakes we had set for night walks. The song dimmed until it was just a suggestion, like a refrigerator through a wall. When I crossed into camp, light it dropped into the floor of hearing and stayed there annoyed. I did not stop until I was inside the mess, until the heater coughed, until Anders mumbled what time is it like sleep could still be a thing. I put the recorder on the table and did not trust my hand to press stop. The little screen still showed a living wave. I watched it become smaller and smaller as the room noise took over. Only then did I press save, and even then it felt like treason. In the morning, the ridge looked exactly like a ridge, a polite hill of white and shadow that did not know music. The fissures near camp had healed into faint white scars. My glove was soft again, and my breath behaved like a good citizen. I walked with Rhea to the path and pretended nothing had a voice. At the edge of the bay, a driftwood piece lay where my headlamp had found it. The letters were crisp and unweathered. You answered, it said, "The scrape mark's fresh, the fiber's still raised." Rhea looked at me, then at the wood, then at the bay. She did not ask. She said, "We do not invite that to breakfast." The recorder plays a quiet version of the hum on its own now. It does it when the room is silent, a very low note that most people think is a generator. I tried new batteries. I tried warming it in my jacket. I tried shouting at it when I was alone, and it coughed up an old joke in my voice out of sequence, which is a thing I cannot explain with any gentle theory. Sometimes when I hold it, the screen breathes and shows a trace before any sound arrives. That is when I set it down and go outside and listen to nothing I can see. You may think this is one of those stories where I explain the physics and you feel safe. I could tell you about thermal stress and mechanical resonance, and the way a shallow basin can amplify a tone you were not meant to hear. I could tell you about pressure ice behaving like the lid of a drum. All true, all neat. What I cannot make neat is the way my name sounded on a mouth that was not a mouth. I still wake to the sound of a vowel pressed against the tent, as if the fabric were a drum head and someone wanted into the little space where my breath makes clouds. I keep the recorder in a drawer I do not lock. If you ever find yourself on a flat bay under a good sky, and the ridge begins to hum like a giant bee, you might feel clever enough to record it. You might even get data that keeps your gran alive for a while. If you hear your name in that music, do one thing for me and for yourself. Let the song end without you in it. Let it look for someone who can talk to rocks and fall in love with echoes. The bay still holds my answer somewhere under the ice. The driftwood took care of the rest. You answered, it says, and the ridge will not forget that I did. Story 4. Last light over Longyearbyen, the last sunset over Longyearbyen did not sink. It bled sideways, staining the snow roofs the color of a healing bruise, then thinned until the ridge line held a dull blade of orange. Every window went warm for a minute, then went blind. On the main street, a single lamp kept flickering in a stubborn rhythm, not bright, not dead, like a person refusing to close their eyes. I set my camera to 1/50th and listened to the town become a soft mechanical hush. If the sun could decide to stop, what else might decide the same? My name is Ellen, and I chase the last light the way fishermen chase a season. Editors pay for the moment, everyone else puts their gloves on and goes inside. Whole shows hang on one frame of color that proves a place survived the year. My stakes were simple. Make the series. Prove I could pull a living out of sky tones and street silence. The locals had their own stakes. They told me not to be out when the lamp stopped flickering. They said the last day of light is a day like any other until it is literal. I laughed because I did not understand what a town could mean with a sentence like that. I framed the street, the lamp, the shadow of the mountain leaning across shop fronts. The dog that lives near the bakery knows the snow, looked at the lamp, and barked once like a warning he had given 100 times. My viewfinder caught a sliver between frames I did not see with my eyes. In the captured still, a tall shape stood in the road. In the next shot, nothing. I cleaned the lens with my glove and told myself it was a reflection from a kitchen light. The dog stared at the lamp, then at me, then at the space beside me, and barked again as if repeating himself for a child. Everyone I cared to annoy had told me the same thing. The lamp is a guide on the last day. If it flickers, it is safe to move. If it burns steady, go inside. If it dies, do not be where it can see you. None of that is an electrical manual, but the lamp was older than the new posts, and no one could tell me which box fed it. The snow under was scalloped by boot prints that did not melt deep. The air tasted like coin and cold iron. The dog barked at nothing and wagged, as if wagging could apologize for the bark. I shot another bracket as the orange blade dulled to ash. The camera shutter is a kind of heartbeat. When you put your ear to your work, you feel each click like a pulse in your jaw. I kept the rhythm steady to calm my nerves. The lamp flickered exactly 4 times, then stalled, then flickered 3 more, a pattern that meant something to itself. The second to last frame of the sequence caught a smudge of gray on the far edge of the light circle. In the last frame, the smudge lengthened into a line that did not touch any object I knew. When I lifted my head, the street was empty. The dog pressed against my leg for a second and went still. A boy in a red hat opened his door and snapped a photo with his phone. His mother yanked him back with a look that was not kidding. People were moving inside the way small towns do, in a weather they recognize, chairs scraping, latches clacking, curtains pulled as if the day was a picture worth keeping. I waved to Runa in the co-op window, and she mouthed "go in," then made a sign with her hand like a match blown out. I turned back to the lamp because the duty of a camera is to point when a throat should swallow. The dog whined at the gutter and backed away as if the gutter had breathed. I decided to earn my long flight here. I switched to a longer exposure, planted the tripod, and took a shot that turned the flicker into a soft thread of light. In that thread, the lamp looked alive. The shop signs became faint ghosts of themselves. I checked the screen and saw a figure again, tall, not a person I recognized, standing near the lamppost like a patient who will wait as long as it takes for the doctor. In the instant after I saw it, the lamp brightened to a hot, steady white, then dropped back to its tired flicker, like a stare that cannot be held. My scalp prickled inside my hat without a good reason. The wind off the fjord skimmed the street with a dry hiss. My shadow stretched toward the co-op too long for the angle of the sun. The light flickered over it, and something in the black seemed to hesitate, as if my shadow had muscles that did not follow orders. I lifted my arm, and the shadow lifted late, then caught up. The delay was a hiccup, easy to forgive and unforgivable because it put the wrong thing in charge for a breath. The dog barked into that breath and then back toward the bakery doorway with his ears flat, tail tucked under. A shape you know, even if your camera is not recording. I took a burst to settle myself. The shutter wrote a fast line of clicks that calmed me the way counting will calm a person at a gentle cliff. When I checked the images, I saw movement between the frames, more than one figure now, the lamp turning them into silhouettes that made no sense. In one, they stood at street corners like friends waiting for a bus. In the next, there were 3 where there had been 2, the third smaller and closer to me than the distance should allow. The glass in the co-op door fogged for a second and cleared, like a person had breathed near it and stepped away. Packet delivery choked for a moment. My phone blinked out and refused to remember who I was. The radio at my belt agreed and settled for a polite hiss. The lamp gave up its easy pattern and took on a stutter that felt angry. Every other flicker skipped and then overcorrected, like a heart that had lost track of step. On the snow, my shadow tried to keep time with the new rhythm and failed. It lagged, then lunged, then caught up wrong. I want to tell you a story about electrical systems and older mains, but all those words tasted like excuses for a thing that had already decided it did not need my permission. I tried to go in. I walked to the co-op door and felt the air thicken like a slow river. The handle would not turn, not because it was locked, but because my hand decided it had to finish a photograph first. That is how addiction feels when it wears a coat you can respect. I turned back, shot the lamp from a different angle, then a third, the camera long and comforting in my grip. The dog barked once more, then sprinted across the street toward the mouth of an alley where you can see the mountain coal chutes if the light is kind. He reached the alley and did not come out. The bark stayed, thin and distant, like a recording left a loop. The lamp glowed steady white for a full second. The street froze. My breath stopped mid-exhale, as if someone had cupped the air around me. In that second of steady light, every shadow stopped moving. When the flicker returned, things resumed, but not in the same order. A long black snake of shadow had slithered up the wall of the gear shop, and a second hung from the eave as if it chose to crawl down instead of lay flat. I could pretend this was lens strain or an optical weirdness if I did not have 2 eyes and a 15-year-old camera that knows honest darkness. I told myself fatigue makes fools of everyone. 5 nights of shooting in cold that kept biting my fingertips through good gloves. Eyes raw, mind unkind. I spoke this to myself like a medic. Then I looked at my shadow. It did not align with my legs. It pointed slightly left toward the lamp, as if my feet had leaned when my body had not. I moved my hand in a slow circle. The shadow moved in a jerky square. When I stilled, it still moved for one more beat, and then stopped as if caught doing something it could not defend. In the lens, my face looked fine, which is what lenses will always say when they take your side. I could have gone for help. I could have walked to Runa's, knocked, made a scene, blamed weather and fear and too much coffee. I did not. The lamp dimmed to a deep orange, a last bruise of color, and then steadied again. I chose to document instead of retreat. It is a choice I have made since I was 12 and took pictures of a lightning strike rather than run inside. Sometimes the camera is a brave decision. Sometimes it is a belief that the act of framing will keep you safe. I stepped to the very center of the light's circle and mic'd the town with my shutter. Everything came closer. I did not see bodies. I saw converging shadows that did not belong to anything lit. They folded over each other in long, soft layers, like eels in a bucket, like ribbons in a wind that only existed where the light touched. From the alley where the dog had vanished, a strip of darkness slid along the ground with the weight of a heavy hose, but it made no sound. My own shadow tugged at my boots. It is a strange sensation to feel darkness pull you by the ankles, as if gravity has a second opinion tonight. The lamp flared, dimmed, then flared again, like it was apologizing to the street for not dying clean. I fired burst after burst. In the viewfinder, I saw a version of the street that did not match the one in front of me. The photos showed long afternoon light, soft and forgiving, snow blue instead of black, the co-op windows full of people making end-of-day faces. The lamp burned perfect white and did not flicker. In that version of the street, there were no shadows without owners. There were no strips sliding from doorways. There was no dog. There was no me. I was not a silhouette on that pavement. There was not even the soft pinch of a photographer's shadow around a tripod. The lamp reached what I think of as a last full breath. The bulb inside burned at a temperature it had no right to reach, white as the core of welding, clean as the strike of a match in a dark theater. That breath pushed the shadows back to the edges. My own shadow stood at attention, thin and exact, and then the last breath left like a sigh you cannot hold. The light collapsed into a small red core, a coal in a glass throat, and stayed there unblinking. The night took what was left without debate. The coal colored the snow in a circle the size of a cheap rug. When the white went, the shadows detached fully. They lost their obligation to lie down and chose to stand. They were not tall shapes. They were not figures made from night. They were flat things that floated at knee height, rippling, learning the corners of the street. They gathered where my feet had been and patted that spot with thin fingertips, as if checking to see if I were still there to step on. The sound was a dry whisper, worms in paper, old silk gloves moving in a drawer. The dog barked then, far under the street, a muffled double bark that felt like it rose through my boots to my... I did not breathe. I took one more photo because I'm slow to learn. The camera captured that other street again, the lit one where people were inside their windows and the lamp held. No one looked out. The space where I stood was empty on that side of the lens. I pinched my coat and shook myself like a swimmer running ideas off. The red coal in the lamp pulsed once, as if to remind me that it could make choices too. The floating shadows lifted to my knees and tugged with a curiosity not meant for people. My own shadow pulled in the opposite direction like a person who does not want to board a bus. I stepped out of the circle. It was not courage. It was the good habit of leaving when a place has counted to 3. The floating strips drifted after my ankles and then broke apart like spilled ink, unable to follow beyond the red. The lamp's red core held them the way a fire keeps wolves at the edge, not frightened, just edged. I backed toward the bakery and met the closed door with my shoulders. Inside, I heard someone breath a prayer in a language I do not know. The shadows rose, tasted the wood, and slipped back to the snow, lazy, thinking about trying again. There was a single consequence for my choice to stand there and photograph instead of hiding. It showed up the next day when Runa and I reviewed the files on my laptop. Frame after frame of beautiful, impossible proof of a street that kept its day a little longer than the rest of us. She rested her finger on the touchpad and stopped on one in particular. The lamp burns white. The windows are warm. The benches by the information board were the gentle oval shadows that afternoon gives. She looked at me and then at the puddle of dark near my boots in the live version and said, "Where are you in that one, Ellen?" I opened my mouth and made a stupid joke about the photographer always being behind the glass. She did not smile. In every frame that showed the lit street, I did not cast a shadow. In 2, a slight, thin-coated person stood where I had stood, but the shoulders were wrong, and the head was turned away, as if listening to a tune I could not hear. We clicked forward. In the last of them, the one I took right before the lamp's white collapsed, even the thin person was gone. The space held the light like a mouth holding a note. The red in the live world made a disc that looked like a stop sign without a word. We went outside together at noon and stared at a sky with no sun in it. The lamp glowed red in the never day. No flique, no pulse, a fixed eye. Snow had drifted across the street in waves like a muscle under skin. There were no prints from the dog. The bakery door had scratches low, as if a dog had asked and been turned away. I put my hand on the lamppost. It was warm as a hand left on a railing. I did not know what fed it. I did not know what it fed. The coal in its throat looked like a small planet. The red reflected in the ice like a warning star. At night, which is the new word for always, I sometimes hear the dog bark twice in the drains. The sound climbs the pipes in a lazy echo and then goes quiet, as if the town shushed it because we were trying to sleep. The lamp gives off just enough red to tell you where not to step. People walk wider around it now. They draw their curtains early and keep their lights low, the way you do when you want to avoid conversation with a neighbor you like just enough to pretend not to be home. The phrase "last day of light" sits on the tongue like a piece of hard candy. You can turn it until it hurts. I'm making prints no one asked for. I print the frames where the street remained lit without me in it. I set them on the counter and watch the truth arrive in the tray. Images growing out of blankness like a town remembering its own face. In each print, the lamp looks fine. In each, the snow holds its soft, quiet shape. In each, the bench wears the shadow of a person who never sits. I keep the negative in a sleeve and tell myself I will not pull it out again. There's a sound it makes when you slide it free, a thin hiss like silk or a foot dragged across paper. I do not need to hear it again. If you come to Longyearbyen in the season when night forgets how to be polite, you will see the lamp. You will taste metal in the air and blame your scarf for holding the smell. You will feel careful for no good reason and tell yourself you are being romantic. Bring a camera if you must, but think about what light can do when it wants to keep something. The last day is not a calendar square. It is a lamp deciding to hold a breath. When it lets that breath go, you should already be inside, counting nothing, making no frames your future self cannot carry without looking over a shoulder. Some evenings I stand across the street and watch that cold glow. The red is not brighter when I look at it. It is simply awake. It paints my boots with a color that refuses to cool. My shadow stays small and obedient, except when the red deepens for a moment and asks a question, and then the shadow leans toward it as if to listen. I feel the pull and shake it off like a dog shaking off ocean water. When I close my eyes, I still see the white version of this street where I do not cast a shade. That world feels clean. This one feels honest. The lamp remains, The night agrees. Story 5. The shadow beneath the pack ice. Something paced beneath the ice like the sea had learned to grow legs. I saw it in the clear pane under my boots, a dark mass gliding in and out of the pale weeds, frozen mid-sway. The light was good enough to read the bottom, good enough to be cruel. When the shape turned, the water shivered and the ice sang a thin glass note that made my teeth ring. I told myself not to look too long. I told myself to mark the thickness and move. My eyes did not agree with my mouth, which is how trouble always begins, right? My name is Victor. I map safe routes for supply sleds when winter decides what is road and what is ocean. If I am careful, everyone eats. If I misjudge a seam, steel and food, and men go down a hole, and the hole closes like a mouth. That is the ladder of stakes I carry, rungs of reputation and livelihood and body. Today the fog was forecast to come in by 1500. I had 2 hours of light that was not light, a rope around my waist, a lantern for the blue of cracks, and a team waiting where the flag line ended. What could go wrong with numbers like that? The first wrong number was the rope's tug. It should rest like a quiet hand on your back. Mine twitched as if someone below had pulled it for a joke. I turned and saw only the sled behind me and the telltale slack that means your mind is making weather. I walked on, tapping with my pole, counting beats to keep the rhythm steady. Talp, pausa, listen. Talp, pausa, listen. Under the ice, the shadow moved with the taps, a lazy mirror following my steps like a friend who knows you too well. Have you ever felt watched by a thing that did not need eyes? On days like this, I keep company with the dead. The old crew left notes in places we still pass, pencil ghosts tucked in dry cracks and rusted tins. In a bent metal box near a cairn, I found a small journal wrapped in oilcloth. The cover had a name I knew, and the first page had a warning written as if it had been written to me. Do not look down long. Eyes learn what is not love them. I ran my glove over the words and felt the hardness of the pencil, as if the hand that wrote them could still press my palm back. I slid the journal into my coat, and my rope ticked, curious. My lantern burned steady yellow until a hairline crack webbed across the ice and the flame dipped blue. Everyone jokes that blue flame is only fuel. Out here, blue means the seam is breathing and you should not. I lifted the lamp and swept it in a slow arc. The blue stuck around like a bad taste and deepened at one spot near my left boot, a small circle where the ice looked thinner, like the skin of cold milk. I feathered the pole over the spot. One knuckle tap, then two. The sound came back with a third tap that belonged to neither of mine. Borrowed rhythms are how places introduce themselves. Yes? I keyed the radio to tell the team I was slowing. Static rose from the speaker in a wet burble. The sound a river makes under ice when it is being polite. I changed channels. More water. I keyed again and heard my own breath echo with delay, hollow, as if I'd stuck my head inside a barrel. I checked the battery and told myself it was dying because batteries hate the cold. Then the cold did a strange thing. It felt selective. The air around my face warmed while the skin of my wrists turned to glass under the glove. The lantern went a clearer blue along the seam, and my rope twitched, pleased. I tried not to look down long. I failed. The water beneath me was dark and thick as oil. The shadow moved across it with a speed that made the weeds shiver against the underside of the ice. It matched my stride exactly. When I slowed, it slowed. When I lifted the pole to scratch my nose, it lifted a darker pole, a joke told by a reflection in a place that had no mirror. I took 3 quick steps to the right to fool it, and the shadow took 3 slow ones, as if learning me and not wanting to rush the lesson. The ice under my right boot answered with a low, patient moan that sounded too much like a name. I tapped the seam again, gentle this time. 1, 2. The ice replied with 1, 2, 3. A show-off's answer, too sweet. I stopped tapping. The third knock arrived anyway, a little late, like laughter after a story you do not want to explain twice. The lantern flame flared blue for a heartbeat and threw the seam into hard relief. I swear I saw a curve beneath it, Not a fish, not a seal, something that refused to be a shape you would not run from. I looked away to break the habit. The old journal warmed like it had been in a pocket that was not mine. "Do not look down long," it said, and I felt it say my name. Fog rose from the west with the softness of slow breath. In 5 minutes, the horizon thinned. In 10, it disappeared. The world narrowed to lantern and rope and the next flag. That is the ticking element we live by up here. You get your work inside a window, and then the window slams. I waved the lamp and watched the blue pool and shine places I did not want to test. The shadow below angled toward me and kept perfect time. My left, its left, my pause, its grace. I told myself I was shadowboxing with a trapped seal. I told myself seals are curious and will mimic for fish. I told myself many helpful lies. The rope went tight as a spelled word. It pulled to the left, toward a seam that looked no more complicated than the last 5. I leaned back and the sled skidded, obedient, but the tug insisted in the way a hand insists when it wants to show you something. I dug in my heels and almost fell because the tug reversed without warning, 2 quick pulses like a heartbeat on a monitor, then slack. I looked down because my skull is a bell that rings for water. The shadow had stepped where I had not, as if it knew the route I would take if I let it lead. I asked the empty air if anyone else saw this. The radio burbled like a man underwater who has not yet learned to die. I needed the team. I shouted into the fog and heard the fog answer like a mouth full of old cloth. The sled behind me creaked on the runners with small, polite sounds that did not care about the sea. I scanned for the next flag and found only a flat white that could have been a road or a prayer. I made my own flag. I planted the pole and tied a length of line to it, and to me, so the map of my last choices would be honest. The lantern guttered blue and went steady yellow. The seam near my boot snapped once like a bored finger. I told myself to walk, not think. I walked. The shadow walked. I stopped. The shadow stopped late, learning. I stepped left. It stepped right, still matching the intent, not the direction, like a dancer trying to please a mirror. I stomped once to scare the feeling out of my legs, and the mass below slammed the underside of the ice, so hard the pole hummed in my hand. My teeth clicked. A ring of frost fractured outward from the stomp like a halo drawn with a broken pen. The lantern flame flare went blue like the hiss of a gas stove, turned too high. I realized then I had been counting its answers against my pulse. They matched. They had learned to match. I tried to outsmart a thing that has never had to be smart. I made a pattern that should have been useless to a seal. I tapped out the opening of a lullaby my mother used when storms got loud. The knocks came back in the same tune, hesitant then eager, and the lantern flickered rhythmically as if a draft blew from a mouth under the ice. The old journal warmed again. I opened it with my teeth, and a thumb and a note fell free. It had been tucked between pages. Do not knock to a song. It will finish it for you. There was no year on the note. There was a stain shaped like the corner of a map. Somewhere in the fog, a gull laughed. I did not see it. The laugh sounded wrong anyway, too low, then too high, a pitch bend on old tape. I moved forward 3 flags by guess, and the rope skated across the ice with me like a snake learning to be helpful. The shadow kept the joke alive. It let me go ahead 2 paces, then slid under my feet as if it had always been there and I had not yet earned the right to notice. The lantern turned blue again. I told myself it was the propane learning to be mean. I told myself I could outwalk a copy. Have you ever tried to outrun your reflection? The fog made a room around me. Ice floor and white walls and ceiling low. The team's voices were gone or swallowed. The radio had settled into a hush, like someone sleeping too well. I checked the time. The window was closing. In 20 minutes, the temperature would fall enough to take choice out of the work. My tongue tasted metal, the taste that comes when you realize your breath has gone shallow without asking you first. I said to you, without meaning to, that it would be fine. The seam answered with a small breath that fogged the ice, then cleared it, like a lung learning a trick. I made the choice that cannot be undone. I tested the shadow. I stomped hard, heel to ice, and braced to leap clear if the pain crazed. The mass below slammed back with exactitude and joy. Cracks spidered outward, thin and white, then closed slightly as water pressed up to fill the new lines. The sled shifted as the rope took the correction. The lantern went a brilliant, lovely blue and stayed there as if it had remembered the right color of cave. The echo of my stomp came again without me, a second slam from below that was not mine, as if the thing wanted to practice with its own weight. The ice held because it had not decided not to. I moved to the right to reset, but my left foot slid without friction. The rope yanked sideways like a hooked fish. The tug did not come from a sled. It came straight down. The rope passed over the edge of a new crack and dipped into the dark like a hand welcomed by a sleeve. I felt the lazy pull on my waist buckle, a patient, constant draw like being chosen by a tide. I dug my free heel into a ridge of snow and shot my pole across to snare a hummock. The tip found a lip and bit. The rope stayed insistent, polite and relentless, like a conversation you cannot win. For a moment, there was a window where I could have let the rope teach me a new shape. I pictured the dark water closing over me, the lantern's blue circle shrinking above like a star. I pictured the mindless instant of equal and opposite, me down, it up, the world filing me, and then forgetting my name. I reached for my knife because pictures are liars. The first cut scraped the rope and through fibers. The second cut found tension and sang. The third cut released a sound I hear at night now, the sound of a tugged thing losing patience at last. The pull slackened as if a hand had relaxed. The rope fell free and traced a gentle loop on the ice that looked like a question mark. I lay on my back and laughed in a way that made no sound. The lantern softened to yellow with a last shiver of blue, the blue receding like a ripple after a thrown stone. The cracks around my left boot sighed and smoothed as the water accepted the old map again. I stood because standing is the difference between being here and being elsewhere. The fog thinned a bit in the lane to my right, a kind gesture. I moved into it and tried not to think about what I had cut myself away from. The old journal beat like a warm bird in my pocket. Did not look down long. It told me again, pleased I had listened late. The radio chose then to remember its voice. It woke with a wet cough and Ria's swear and a burst of names that fit me in a direction I could use. I answered with nothing clever, just the fact of being on my feet and moving. The channel burbled with underwater noise for a moment, like a delay line had to finish a word before it could accept mine. I told them I had severed the waist rope. Ria told me to keep talking until I could not, and then to hum a tune if talking failed, which is a joke you do not make with an ocean under you. I hummed anyway because the fear of silence is older than sense. The hummed line came back through the ice. Not loud, not near, a duplication in the floor. Hum, pause, hum, like a child learning to ride without hands. The lantern did not change color. The cracks did not open. The echo was not a threat. It was a promise kept by a reflection that had been denied a trade. I walked faster while my throat found a new song, a dumb song, anything that belonged to the air above and not the water below. The team's flag appeared through the fog like a mast, and I let myself look down a final time to check the path. The shadow did not match my feet. It lagged now, a sulk, a delay I could live with. They hauled me over the sheltered ridge like any other man who almost did the wrong. The lantern went to someone else's hand. Ria checked the cut rope, then my belt, then my eyes. She said a sentence I expect to hear in some recipe for mercy later. You are here. She did not ask me to say what pulled. I did not say. We tied a new rope, looser, more ritual than safety, and walked back to the depot while the fog made the world small enough to carry. Behind us, the seam breathed once more, and I shut its mouth for now. In the heated room, I peeled my boots off, and the crew went quiet the way crews go quiet when they pretend not to watch. The prints I left on the mat were wet and dark like any man's after a hard walk. The edges looked wrong. The heel ovals were a hair too long. The toes slightly pointed as if the leather had learned a different foot, or as if something had worn my boots harder from below. Anders laughed to break the spell and said it was only the cut rope playing tricks on the ankles. I laughed too, because it was easier than saying I wanted every bucket of water in the room to stop looking at me. That night, when the wind found its voice again and the depot settled into the creeks you learn and love, something knocked on the water barrel in the corner. A slow tap that matched my heartbeat at first, then beat twice when I held my breath, like a pulse trying to be clever. I told myself it was expansion from warmth. I told myself what remembers water and knocks when it forgives you. The second tap came late and amused, 3 beats after the first, the way the ice had learned to wait before it made my stomp into a reply. I set the lantern on the barrel lid. The flame flared blue and then steadied yellow, and the tapping stopped as if a hand had moved away. I sleep now with the old journal under my pillow, which is a sentimental thing for a man with a tape measure for a friend. Sometimes I wake and the pages are warmer than the room. Sometimes I hear a small knock under the plywood floor, polite, not urgent, as if a neighbor wishes to borrow a cup of air. I do not answer in words. I answer by curling my toes in boots that I check twice, by keeping my eyes on the horizon instead of the glass at my feet. If you ever work ice where the ocean pretends to be a road, remember the only rule that is worth more than any pole. Do not look down long. The mirror down there is hungry and very patient. The route we marked held for the sleds the next morning. We sent the loads across with ropes that did not twitch. The lanterns burned a humble yellow the whole way, like they were embarrassed to have been dramatic. At the far end, by the last flag, the ice had melted to black beneath a clear pane no bigger than a dinner plate. No one stepped there. I did not look at it. I felt the exact center of it with the hairs on my arms. The old journal in my pocket went cool at last, as if a fever had broken. The water was quiet, and I did not ask it for forgiveness or answers. If I owe you a moral, it is small. Reflections are not toys. Knocks are not music. Ropes love you until the other end finds a better friend. Blue flame is a grammar the ice uses when it cannot speak. Most of all, some things below will practice you until they are good at being you, and they will be very polite about it. If you hear tapping in a barrel, do not lean your ear too close. If you must, hum a tune that belongs to your mother and walk away with your eyes on the door. The sea can have your shadow for a while. Make sure it never learns your step.